These right here are the Shure Aonic 50 Generation 2, an all-new, all-upgraded version of the premium consumer headphone. And in this case, comparing it with Gen 1, everything changed except literally the case. Well, yeah, they changed the color to all black everything, but other than that, it's the same shell. So of course I'm going to go over all the changes that Shure has done to these headphones and compare it with the previous version in terms of sound quality, ANC, battery life, comfort levels, mic quality and controls. So without further ado, let's get into all of that right after the intro. Design-wise, nothing has changed significantly. The same shape, the same size, the same great looks. Well, except as mentioned previously, the metal finish is gone and now everything is drenched in black only. No more color choices, just one version. In my opinion, this is good to distinguish it from its predecessor. But if I could have had the say about the design, I would have loved another brown leathery option as in Gen 1, since this is still my favorite looking headphone. Buttons-wise, they also changed nothing overall. Everything is still at the same place in the right order and feels natural to me, especially coming from a Gen 1 user. You're going to feel right at home if you're upgrading. But don't be fooled by this. The inside is what has changed significantly when comparing it to the older model. Let's start digging, well, in with battery runtime. Gen 1 was coming in with a not so great runtime of 20 hours of ANC on. And yeah, 3 years ago this wasn't that impressive as well. And it was one of my main critiques when I made the review. The new model now features a much better runtime of 45 hours, which doubles the length of playing your tunes and adds a bit on top. This still is not the best, since more and more are going for 60 hours plus, but at least you don't have to charge them every other day like I used to with Gen 1. Also, Shure finally managed to add a fast charging function, which gives you 5 additional hours of playback with a short 15 minutes of charging. That's a welcome addition in my book. When it comes to additional features, Shure also finally gave them something I haven't seen in most other headphones in this price category so far. Well, at least not in this kind of expression. As you may or may know, spatial audio is something a lot of headphone manufacturers are including in every earbud and headphone nowadays. And mostly I test this feature once and then never activate it again. But Shure actually, and in my opinion, brilliantly made it work for the first time ever. They added their own pattern algorithm that widens the soundscape without introducing noise patterns all over your tunes. And here comes the clue, actually added 3 different variations of it, specifically tuned to the 3 most used cases for headphone listeners. Music, which gives you the most subtle change, making it a tad more immersive. Cinema, which is fun when watching movies. The sound changes and feels a bit more like you're actually sitting in the back seat, and the tone is also a bit deeper. And then there's podcast mode, which clears out the space around you for voices and brings them in even closer. I definitely felt a bit like sitting in the middle of 2 hosts listening to them creating a podcast. In my opinion, it's an interesting take on the spatial audio feature and much more interesting than just placing it around you in 3D space like so many other headphone manufacturers are implementing it. Next up is Bluetooth and all of the codecs. Yeah, well, they aren't using a newest Bluetooth codec, but it's still Bluetooth 5, which is fine in my opinion. But on the other hand, they give you every goddamn codec imaginable, meaning aptX, aptX HD, aptX Adaptive, AAC, SBC and Sony's LDAC. And of course they are using the Qualcomm Snapdragon sound for it, the same as every other headphone manufacturer actually seems to be doing recently. So no complaints on codecs here. Then let's also quickly go over the Shure Plus Play app, which has gotten a lot of upgrades since I last used it. And now it's filled to the brim with things to change, to equalize and even more. But it's still very slow to boot up every time you use it. Everything you want from a companion app is there. And the most impressive equalizer to get the headphones sound to your taste as well. And I really actually mean it. So much to tweak and to pull. Also, you can use the headphones over USB-C for high-res listening, which isn't a given in most other headphones these days. But remember, you need to activate that first in the app. Before we get into the most important parts of this review, let's quickly get into a mic quality test. This is a mic test and I'm trying to see if it sounds any different than the previous generation. Of course, I'm not able to hear it right now, but hey, you can, so feel free to give me your opinion on the mics and everything else down in the comments below. Now there are 2 things left before we get into the comparison part of the headphones. So let's start with ANC first. It was and still is very lackluster on Gen 1 headphones. And this overall was my biggest gripe when it came to the first generation of the Aonic 50s and why I did not use them that much outside of my own 4 walls. And let's actually be frank here, Gen 2 is much better. By a mile. It finally feels like they added a good enough ANC into these cans. Not the best, of course, but good enough for me to wear them more often and not get actually distracted by constant interruptions through outside noises. I'd say it's on par with most ANCs you could get in the 2022 versions of other manufacturers' headphones. To illustrate that, here's a comparison of the Gen 1 versus the Gen 2 ANC. And now finally, here's what the previous version was already good at, the sound quality. And in my opinion, Gen 2 actually sounds even better. I'm not sure what they actually changed in terms of driver since it's still a dynamic driver. But whatever they did, they finessed the sound and made it even more tighter and more enjoyable in total. Of course, I could now begin talking about the mids and the highs and how the frequency response is blah blah blah. But I think it's much easier to just listen to it for yourself and form your own opinion on it. So here is the Shure Aonic 50s Gen 1 and Gen 2 sound comparison. Now there's only one negative that I encountered while using the headphones. I was using them sitting in the bus to my workplace trying out the ANC, and every time the bus drove over a bump in the road, the headphones had a millisecond of wobble and sound distortion in them. It felt like actually the driver built in was absorbing the shock and therefore the electric field or something got distorted. Of course, I'm in no way experienced enough or an expert in this to say that this was actually what happened. But it was something I haven't experienced before, except for very old AKG headphones I used roughly 10 years ago. While walking normally, there was no wobble or distortion at all, so I think this only happens when the impact is very strong. So what's my conclusion on the Shure Aonic 50 Gen 2s? If you already own the Gen 1 and you like them as much as I did when it comes to sound quality, then you could definitely go for an upgrade. Everything was finally revamped and is superior in any way to Gen 1. If you are looking for a very well-rounded headphone that can do everything not exceptionally well, but finally on par with its competitors and does some small things even better, then feel free to also get these as your personal headphones. I think Shure made a good decision in sticking to the same shell, but doubling down on the internals, making them so much better than what they've done, well, 3 years ago. And of course, it still shows that Shure knows what they are doing. It's one of my favorite headphones of 2023 so far. As always, my name is Leech and I'm off writing the next scripts. If you enjoyed this video, then make sure to subscribe to this channel. There are plenty more of this type of videos and many other things available for you to watch. Have a great day, see you around and goodbye.